This is Joseph Campanella. Bishop Sheen's spoken and written words are a treasure for God's people of all religions. The diversity of his words reflect his certainty that it is not a unity of religion that we plead for, but a unity of religious people.
One of the most important things when you're sailing is wind direction. You always have to know where the wind is coming from.
Elo commented on one of my videos concerning Bishop Fulton Sheen. He said, "I very much appreciate this series on Sheen. He was full of blarney. Although I cannot find the reference, I remember reading that he presented himself as having received a doctorate from the University of Louvain. He was caught in this lie and admitted to having lied." Now this was a very interesting comment, and I researched it as best I could. And this story is more convoluted than you think it might be. And though I'll answer some questions, there are still more questions that are unanswered. But if you're interested in the Bishop Sheen saga, grab some popcorn and let's dig into this. He received a Licentiate of Sacred Theology degree from the Catholic University of America. This degree is usually considered a prerequisite for pursuing a doctorate in theology. Bishop Sheen wrote that he received a doctorate in Rome in 1924. But in between the time of attending the Catholic University of America and obtaining his doctorate in Rome in 1924, he attended the University of Louvain in Belgium. And his relationship to the university is murky at best. And that's the topic of this video. In the first part of this video, let's look at newspaper articles, and we'll start with the most modest claims and ascend to the grandest. I should note that since Bishop Sheen was a talking head, he most likely had a printed bio that he handed out to reporters. And, like most of us, he probably tinkered with his resume over the years. What we don't know is what the bio actually said and how much his bio contributed to the confusion. This article in 1946 merely says that Bishop Sheen attended the University of Louvain. This article from the Tidings, 9 years later in 1955, says that he pursued graduate study at the university. And this article in 1964 from the Catholic Advance is similar in that it says he did graduate work at the university. Let's look at the title page of Bishop Sheen's first book from 1925, God and Intelligence and Modern Philosophy. Here Bishop Sheen tells us that he achieved a certification of an aggregate at the University of Louvain. Interestingly, he lists it here in French instead of English. Perhaps he thought it sounded more exotic and especially prestigious that way. Certainly it confused a lot of people for decades to come, because at that time, very few people in the United States had ever even heard of an aggregate. Before the internet, many dictionaries didn't even include a definition for aggregate. But here's a definition from a dictionary dating back to the 1960s. So, an aggregate is an academic rank or certification that would have allowed Bishop Sheen to teach at the university. However, it is important to note that it is not a degree. Here it says that Bishop Sheen graduated from a special course in Catholic doctrine. This presumably refers to the aggregate certification. Please note that the aggregate was a certification, and it was incorrect to say that Bishop Sheen graduated. It was a pass-fail examination that led to a certification. According to the French Ministry of Education, the aggregation is a competitive exam that certifies a candidate's ability to teach a particular subject at a high level. It is considered a certification rather than a degree, and passing the aggregation is a prerequisite for many teaching positions at the university level in France. This relatively early article from the tablet in 1934 says Bishop Sheen had earned exceptionally high academic honors at the University of Louvain. This apparently alludes to, and perhaps attempts to explain, what an aggregate is. Here's an even earlier article from 1927 that says Bishop Sheen had been made a fellow at the university. However, this is the only article I found that says this. Here we read that Bishop Sheen had distinguished himself as a philosopher at the university. But now let's get into the weirder stuff. Here we read that Bishop Sheen won the degree of aggregate, which it says was even higher than a doctorate. As noted, an aggregate is not even a degree. Perhaps the writer was trying to make some sense of the fact that since Bishop Sheen was certified to teach doctoral candidates, The writer reasoned that perhaps his certification must have been higher than the many years it takes to achieve a PhD. But this is just apples and oranges. The French Embassy in the United States states that the aggregation is a high-level teaching certification that is highly valued in the French education system. It is considered a certification rather than a degree, and it allows the holder to teach advanced courses in their subject area at the university level. Evidently, I'm not the first person to scratch my head over the notion of a super doctorate. Here's a conversation of somebody linking some foolishness from the Catholic League about a super doctorate on the message board at degreeinfo.com. But then by 1960, we see this article saying that Bishop Sheen had earned a PhD from the University of Louvain in 1923. And here's another one from 1968. Again, it says Bishop Sheen had earned his PhD way back in 1923. Bishop Sheen is listed on IMDb because of his television show. Here is his current IMDb bio that says that he received a doctorate from the University of Louvain. Here's an article from 1951 that says that Bishop Sheen was an honorary professor at the University of Louvain. It's hard to tell whether they're referring to his aggregate certification or whether he had received an honorary degree at some time before 1951. We do know from this article in the Brooklyn Tablet that Bishop Sheen received at least one honorary doctorate from the University of Louvain. In 1957, more than 30 years after some media sources were saying Bishop Sheen had earned an actual doctorate, this appeared, and so it begs the question, would a university that had given an individual a real PhD then later give him an honorary degree? Maybe, but it doesn't seem to make too much sense. Here's another mention of the honorary degree in the Tidings. What did Bishop Sheen think of honorary degrees? In 1967, after having received his honorary degree, he wrote in his book, Footprints in a Darkened Forest, "Thus, the rich keep their high level by enriching the rich. They get an honorary doctorate at commencement exercises and tickets at the 50-yard line at one of the football games." So maybe we should take a look at Bishop Sheen's books. In these, he is very consistent, at least up to the time of the Second Vatican Council. I'm making the assumption that these are the most reliable. We have already looked at the title page of his 1925 book, God and Intelligence in Modern Society. And here he says that he achieved the aggregate certification, but he doesn't give the year that it was awarded. It's the same thing in his next book from 1928, Religion Without God. Bishop Sheen says that he earned a aggregate certification, but he doesn't give the year. In Bishop Sheen's 1933 book, The Seven Last Words, he again says that he achieved an aggregate certification, but again he doesn't give the year. It's the same thing as 1934 book. He mentions his certification, but doesn't give the year. In his 1940 book, The Seven Virtues, he again says that he achieved an aggregate certification, but doesn't give the year. In his 1958 book, Life of Christ, Bishop Sheen again says that he achieved an aggregate certification, but doesn't give the year. And this was the way it was in every one of Bishop Sheen's earlier books that I could find online. But then came the Second Vatican Council. To the Novus Ordo Church, truth became changeable. We have already documented how Bishop Sheen had gone off the rails with the council. Before his death in 1979, he decided to write his autobiography. Earlier in this playlist, we quoted some of the really weird stuff from it. But let's look at it again. In this passage, Bishop Sheen says that he did not yet have his doctorate from the University of Louvain, which strongly implies that at one point he had obtained it. And then he wrote that the university had a higher degree, which was called an aggregate. As we have noted throughout this video, there is no such degree as an aggregate. What Bishop Sheen wrote here, assuming that he did write it, is kind of crazy, and it is demonstrably false. Perhaps since the notion of him having had received a super degree had been repeated so often in the press without challenge, Bishop Sheen started to drink his own Kool-Aid and decided he could just go with it. To repeat, an aggregate is not a super doctorate. It is not even a degree. It is a certification. Google Translate translates it as associate professor. And then in the appendix of his autobiography, it says that he obtained his PhD at the University of Louvain in 1923. We can only pity the poor editor who wrote and had to rely so much on the misinformation from and about Bishop Sheen. And then finally in 2014, well after Bishop Sheen's death, Finding True Happiness was published. The editor perpetuated the claptrap that an aggregate is a super doctorate. I went on the internet and looked for anyone that I could find with an aggregate certification. For anyone who I could find an email address, I sent an email. I wrote at least 20 of them, and I asked them, what does an aggregate represent? One person out of the 20 was kind enough to respond and advised me that Professor Aggregate is the French terminology for associate professor. And I'm very grateful for that one person responding. But clearly Bishop Sheen's autobiography misrepresents what an aggregate is, and this is undeniable. But this still leaves many more unanswered questions, and I don't like leaving loose ends, but maybe some people watching this video will have some additional information and we can fill in the blanks. The first question is, was Bishop Sheen's autobiography edited after his death by a well-meaning editor trying to fit in the pieces of the puzzle? Perhaps Bishop Sheen never even wrote about an aggregate being a super degree. Maybe it was just the editor. Also, editing might explain some of the other weird things in his autobiography that we covered in past videos. Secondly, before his autobiography, Bishop Sheen claimed that he had earned an aggregate, but he never said it was in 1923, at least not that I could find. It is possible that he was awarded the certification sometime after he earned his PhD in Rome in 1924. And this makes most sense to me. Third, if he achieved the certification in 1923, it would mean that they gave it to him without him having ever received a PhD, but this does seem unlikely. This seems unlikely, but it is within the realm of possibility. Perhaps the university was given the understanding that he had already earned his PhD previously at the Catholic University of America. That's unlikely, and it would have involved deception by Bishop Sheen. It is also possible, though unlikely, that they gave him an aggregate in 1923, knowing that he didn't have his PhD yet. I do know of similar things happening nowadays. I know of one guy who's a teacher at a local college's MBA program. He doesn't have a doctorate or an MBA. However, he's a good talker and must have talked himself into the job. But the fact that he teaches at the college doesn't mean that he has a degree higher than an MBA. And I know of another guy who teaches religion at a Protestant college. He doesn't have a master's or a PhD, and his degree isn't any higher than the students will have when they graduate. 4. It is possible that Bishop Sheen had earned his PhD at the university and then earned his aggregate certification in the same year. But this also seems unlikely. Though the media had said that Bishop Sheen had earned a doctorate at the University of Louvain, Bishop Sheen never made that claim in all the decades he was writing and was on television until his posthumous autobiography. The misinformation in Bishop Sheen's autobiography has left little ripples in our culture. First, his Wikipedia page says that he has a doctorate from the University of Louvain, and though, as I noted, that is a possibility, it seems very unlikely since Bishop Sheen never mentioned it in his own lifetime. Secondly, while most modern online dictionaries accurately describe the nature of an aggregate, there are some that apparently have been influenced by all the internet misinformation about Bishop Sheen that says an aggregate is a degree. This incorrect definition comes from dictionary.com, and this one comes from the Collins Dictionary. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back again within a week with another one. But in the meantime, please check out my Facebook page and my Twitter page. Every day I post additional content that you won't find on this YouTube channel. And also, please pray for the church.
Well, I've been to the bottom and to the top of the hill. I've been to the bottom and the top of the hill.